be introducing our presenter today. It's common for people to ask for a car on their 16th birthday, but that wasn't adventurous enough for our presenter, Susan Bladholm. She took a flying lesson in a Cessna for her 16th birthday. The transportation bug has stayed with her. Susan has spent much of her life and career introducing and managing new transportation options for the citizens of Oregon. She was the co-founder and first executive director of Cycle Oregon. She spent 10 years as the director of corporate marketing for the Port of Portland. And when she is not revolutionizing Oregon's transportation, she volunteers her time at Providence's Hope for Cancer Immunotherapy. Please welcome Susan Bladholm.
Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here with you today, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I so appreciate David and Todd coordinating and welcoming me here on this beautiful Sunday morning. Can everyone here see my screen? I'm going to go ahead and do the slideshow. I'm going to quickly take you through kind of the evolution of Frog Ferry, give you a sense for where we are today, how this came to be, and just a lot of the legwork that's been behind this, and overall the vision for it. There's a lot of information here. I present this about twice a week, and believe it or not, I've presented it well over 400 times now. You wouldn't know with the technical difficulties, but I really encourage questions because it's a great way for me to learn and for us to learn, and I find that the questions really have helped us address and find answers and help us move this forward. So I'm going to talk at you kind of quickly because I really want to leave some time for us for questions. So this is the first awkward slide of a slide of myself, but we have found that people often wonder, why this tall redhead? Why are you doing this? Why is it a public agency that did this? And candidly, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought I would have been in this position. But I do have a background, as Todd mentioned, in transportation infrastructure. I spent 10 years with Business Oregon, which is a state agency. Back then it was called the Oregon Business Development Department under the governor's office. I was a co-founder of Cycle Oregon at the ripe old age of 22. I had just graduated from college. And back then, for cycling, it's very reminiscent, actually. Frog Ferry is with Cycle Oregon. We didn't have infrastructure around cycling, and we didn't have a culture around it. And so today, when we kind of take cycling for granted and having the wider shoulders on the roadways and having places to lock up our bikes, really, by and large, that did not exist 32 years ago. I spent 10 years as a director with the Port of Portland. So that's Portland International Airport and Hillsborough Airport and the Marine franchise. And the Port of Portland is the largest owner of industrial property in the 4-county metro region. I was a leader at Greater Portland, Inc., which is a regional economic development entity, Travel Portland. And then until a year and a half ago, I was part of the leadership team with Ericsson, which is a 49-year-old legacy company. And it's a manufacturer of helicopters as well as an operator. So it's known for fighting really big catastrophic fires. It's known for post-major events like an earthquake or a major hurricane. They go in with these big helicopters and restring power lines and rebuild infrastructure like dams and water supply lines in rural communities. And then to Todd's kind of tease, when I was 16, I've just always really been enamored by flight and flying. And about 12 years ago, I started flying, and I'm divorced, but my ex-husband and I flew around the region quite a bit. He's a very accomplished pilot. And we would fly out of Aurora Airport, which is down by Canby and Charbonneau, up and over the Willamette and Columbia Rivers, up to the Puget Sound area. And just about as far as the eye can see there and up in the San Juans and Vancouver, BC, you can see a ferry system. And I was actually leading my college reunion, and my vice chair was coming in from Bainbridge, and he said, Susan, can we schedule our meetings around the ferry service? Because I'll take the ferry to the meeting. And so that kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And one day we landed back at Aurora, and I called Mary Shaver of Shaver Tugboat and Marine. And Mary and I had been on a board together years ago. And I said, Mary, you're the smartest person I know of in the maritime world. We have traffic congestion is the #2 top issue for the Portland region. And this is pre-COVID, but there are all implications are that even as we work through and transition into the new normal here, traffic congestion and our air quality remains a key concern here. And Mary said, my dad and I believe that we should be activating our waterways here. We tried this 19 years ago. We couldn't get our public leaders behind us, but we really believe as kind of water experts that this is something we should be doing. And she introduced me to Ann McIntyre, who is the president of the Willamette and the Columbia Pilots Association. And I met with Captain McIntyre, and she said, absolutely, as pilots, river pilots, we believe that this should be done. And I am here to help you. And even though you don't have a maritime background, you just tell folks I'm on your team. And candidly, no one has questioned my credentials since then, because she's very well recognized and very credentialed. She's very highly regarded. So that was back in 2017. And I just wondered, why don't we have a ferry service here? It was really just from a position of curiosity. I went out and met with the transit leaders, and I told them about this idea, and they said, you know, we don't think it can be done. We think with the river debris issue and the low bridge clearance and all. And I went back and I did a little bit more homework, particularly in the Seattle market. I met with a number of the ferry experts there. They all said, we love Portland. We want to help out. We think this is a great idea. We love our ferries up here. And they basically said, here's a vessel that would work on the Willamette. Came back to our local transit officials at ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and PBOT, the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and Metro, and TriMet, and CTran, and the City of Portland, and said, you know, we do believe this can be done. And there's a lot more work and due diligence, but we do think it can be done. And our transit agencies said, oh, wow, well, even if it can be done, we don't have any expertise in this field, and we think that you should go ahead and do this, and we'll help support you. And I said, so strategically, you believe this is a good idea. You acknowledge that we're spending billions of dollars a year on transportation infrastructure. You're acknowledging that those investments are not going to help combat congestion, and you still don't want to take this on. And that's how we got to where we are today, candidly. In 2018, we created a board. We are now a nonprofit. We have gotten our 501c3. I can't thank enough the ferry experts out of Seattle and San Francisco, but I've candidly talked with ferry experts around the world on this, and they have all been, to every single person, so kind and willing to share. And again, I'm not an expert in this field, but I've had engineers with 50 years in the business sit there and draw out propulsion systems and crankshafts to show me time and time again how the propulsion system works. And I'm so grateful to them. A lot of outreach. We did host our first press conference in 2018. We had 130 favorable, discrete stories, not like the rerunning of stories. And it was like, whoa, something's going on here. There was so much interest and support behind this. And then a lot of just individuals like you and me, as well as larger entities that said, we want to help out. So Miller Nash Law Firm called me and said, we want to help out pro bono with legal. And then we started having advertising agencies and PR agencies and web designers and printers and event planners. And it was really interesting how there was just kind of an area of heat here, people wanting to be part of this. In 2019, we did a lot of outreach to local leaders, educating them about the work. We were awarded an Oregon Department of Transportation STIF grant, which is a statewide transit improvement fund grant. and it was matched with $40,000 from the city of Portland. And that money is going to an operational feasibility study and finance plan, which we will be delivering to the public this October. So that was a huge feather in our cap and kind of made everyone sit up and say, oh, they really are moving things forward. We had all of the public transit agencies said, you need to do that operational feasibility study, but you also need to do a best practice case study report. And we did, and you can find that listed on our website. And then also going down to 2020, they said you need to deliver a demand modeling study to prove out the demand at the different stops. And we did that. We hired on Echo Northwest, and we did that in tandem. TriMet and PBOT put in a little bit of money, and it was enough to kind of check the box and say, yes, we believe there is adequate demand. The Murdoch Charitable Trust on March 10th, and we all know that Oregon shut down on March 13th. March 10th gave us a grant of $300,000, which is really helping with some of our office expenses and also me for a salary, because I had been doing this completely pro bono for 3 years. And then we're looking to build out a proof of concept, which would be a pilot project. And we are on track. We've had some really good news in recent weeks to launch that in 2022. We do have to secure a public agency sponsor in order to get federal funding. So there are 5 different buckets of Federal Transportation Administration funding out there just for ferries. 40 states in the nation tap in to those funds for ferries. Oregon is one of 10 states that hasn't historically. And so we think we've got a really good opportunity there to get some federal dollars. And we are working on securing the support of the Oregon and Washington congressional delegations. So we've got their support making the federal ask. Again, this would be for a public ferry service. We feel that the status quo is not matching our transit needs here, and we need choices. And as you look at the downtown grid, you can see that river is just the backbone of our community. And in fact, because of our location at the confluence of 2 rivers, it's why we are here. It's why the native peoples actually said this is a great place for us to build our community and the richness that a river system provides. And we have the bounty of actually 2 rivers right here in our region. And we know that ferries are considered best practices for river cities. In the nation, there are only 3 river cities of our size that don't have some sort of water-based transit. All the others do. And that's what I was talking about in terms of, that's why there are these funds out there for ferry services. Commuter ferries are a proven worldwide concept. As you look at the top 80 river cities in the world, all of them have ferry services or some sort of water-based transit. We know that Portland, the Vancouver area has an issue here with traffic, and again, pre and post-COVID. And I can tell you that in terms of transit, ferries are the #1 preferred means for people being lured out of their cars into a transit mode is by ferry. And the San Francisco ferry system has excellent data that way. Also, for a mode of transit, the air circulation in ferries is just really exceptional. And it's something that as we're talking with boat builders, we really want to make sure that in the COVID age and the pandemic age we're in, that we're going to ensure excellent circulation. Our mission is to create, obviously safety is going to be #1, a sustainable, and always we describe that, river-friendly public passenger ferry service. So this is public, this is not for a private ferry service, and it's passenger only. So oftentimes people will say, well, Washington State Ferries have a really big system. Why don't you just go to them and have them add this to their department? Well, the Washington State Ferries only operate vehicle ferries. Yes, they'll take passengers, but they're all by cars. And so their funding mechanism is through a fuel surcharge. So we would be passenger ferries only with storage there for bikes. And we just believe we really want to connect people to people. We feel like a lot of our communities are becoming siloed here. And really the bigger play here is to foster stewardship of our rivers. Our rivers are often viewed as something that's out there. We don't have a lot of points of contact. We don't have a lot of areas where people can go congregate along the river. If you're a boater, it's very hard even to access fuel. And even our Bureau of Sustainability here for the city of Portland has said, we viewed the rivers as an impediment or an obstacle to get around or over, but we have not inherently built a community to really embrace the rivers. Our objectives behind this is we think there's a great opportunity to educate our community about our native paths through this. And I'm going to tell you the story of Frog, which is based on the Chinookan mythology, but really having the native culture interwoven into the operation and kind of the look and feel, and just looking at the sites and the stops that we can tell the story of the native tribes and what life would have been like in those locations. For resilience planning and emergency response, absolutely. Having vessels that can move people in river cities is considered a best practice. And for Portland, we have very few vessels in the event of a major earthquake. Looking at 9/11, over 500,000 people were evacuated from New York there in Ground Zero, post that horrible event. We think there's a great opportunity for benefiting low income and medium income people and neighborhoods, especially as we see gentrification and so many employees that are being pushed further from the central downtown core, which is a primary economic engine. There's a low operational subsidy, and I'm going to get into that in just a minute, of the ROI being pretty darn significant for ferries in comparison with other transit modes. An iconic presence on the water, certainly economic vitality, because we know a strong transportation system is one of the fundamental pillars of healthy communities. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, super important behind our effort here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our propulsion system. Benefiting the tourism industry. Typically, there's an uptick of 30 to 50% passengership in the summer months due to the visitor market. This would be a public-private partnership, so helping us move very quickly and be very efficient with the funding, tapping into federal funding for infrastructure costs. Most transportation costs around the metro area for roads and rail, it's a 50-50 match of federal funds and local funds. For ferries, it's an 80 or 90 to 20 or 10% match. So it's a much larger federal investment than it is for most transit projects. So that's new to Portland, because usually we're accustomed to coming up with a 50% match and then fostering the stewardship of the river. And we know when people know something and they love it, that people are going to be more inclined to protect them. And as I've got two kids who are 26 and 21, honestly, they've had very little interface with our waterways here growing up. I had very little interface with our waterways growing up. And I would really like to broaden our awareness and the education about the river and the importance of it and the wildlife around it. So the story of Frog, I promised you, and you can, I hope, see right over my shoulder is a lithograph of Frog. And I had the good fortune to work with the chair of the Chinookan tribe, Tony Johnson, and his art partner, so an artist named Adam McIsaac, when I was working at the Port of Portland. And they do incredible carvings. And so when we were working on an installation there, we became friends. And after we completed that project, they gave me a lithograph of Frog. And they explained that frogs represent good fortune. And in the Chinookan mythology, frogs are credited with teaching the local people how to fish by collecting nettles from the riverbank and stitching them together to create nets. And so truly helping people learn how to fish. And this is an example of some of their work as well as some of the historic work. And you can see there at about 3 o'clock, that is an illustration of the canoes, and they had these animal images on the bow and the stern. And there at 1 o'clock is one of Adam's carvings of the bow of a ship, and they would have the animal imagery on there. So that's actually Coyote looking through the face of a tribal chief to instill confidence with him. So we just loved the imagery of our friend Frog. Benefits for you as someone here in the community, whether you would be a passenger or simply a resident here. One of the first things we learned about, people were always saying, oh, time and cost, you've got to beat that. Well, actually, reliability is the #1 factor for success for transit service, just about anywhere, but for the ferry services we researched, knowing that you're going to get there at the projected time, whereas, you know, in a car, it's often hard to forecast that when you're actually going to arrive, and just the amount of time you're sitting there, often in traffic. And then secondly, it's optimizing your time, the highest use of your time. So rather than being behind a steering wheel, it's what you can do with that time in terms of tending to your text messages and your emails. And then reducing stress came out very high in the research that we have read from some of the other ferry markets. And then time and cost came in as about the 4th and the 5th variables for it. But in looking at costs, when you think about commuters from Vancouver, for instance, there are this is pre-COVID, 135,000 vehicles a day that cross the I-5 bridge, Monday through Friday. Of the 135,000, 35,000 are commuting into Portland's downtown core. So that would be our market there. C-Tran was transporting about 1,100 people by bus. So you think of people into the downtown core commuting for about an hour and 10 minutes on average, and then parking and spending about $230 a month on parking and the wear and tear of the cost and the fuel, versus coming in and buying a ferry pass, which would probably be at about $130 a month. So it just gives you a little bit of a sense of the benefits. This is a map showcasing some of the proposed routes.
I'm not hearing.
I'm just letting it run because I just want people to kind of take in the map. For me, sometimes as I'm trying to take it in, it's hard for me to understand and appreciate. So of these different locations, they wouldn't all necessarily be part of a regular commute. Some would be on demand. So for instance, the convention center, and that's where the Rose Garden is, that could be a special service just for when we have convention delegates in town or going there for a Blazer game. Vancouver to the downtown core, we would see as being regular commuter, but we could also see like a Saturday, there's a wonderful farmer's market up in Vancouver. The waterfront up there is fantastic in the restaurants, but they would have a more of a set schedule, whereas OMSI would probably be more based on when we get school kids get out there for field trips, or families on a weekend to go to OMSI. So those are the different stops we're looking at. People often ask, what is the time frame on this? So from Vancouver down to Salmon Street, and I mentioned that was averaging, again, pre-COVID at an hour and 10 minutes during rush hour. That's 38 minutes, and that's against the current. So with the current, that's closer to about 30 to 32 minutes. From Cathedral Park to OHSU, and we know there are 498 employees a day, Monday through Friday, that commute from Cathedral Park to OHSU. And that often is about an hour, and you're paying $25 to $30 a day for parking, would be 18 minutes, and then it would be shorter returning. And those employees candidly need to be there in person. They're not able to telecommute. This is a prototype of what the vessel could look like. It's probably not going to look exactly like this, but it gives you an idea. This is one that's currently serving on the Potomac in Washington, D.C. And what's really notable about it is it's a double-hulled catamaran, so it's super stable, and it's a very low profile, or they call it a low air draft. And that's really important to us for clearance of the steel bridge. One of the things that's very unusual about the Willamette River is the tidal shift over the course of the year is 26 feet. And most rivers don't vary that much around the world. So the Willamette has its own group of challenges for the mission requirements, certainly. And it's one of the reasons that probably we don't already have a ferry service. But there has been a huge evolution in the ferry space, particularly in the past 10 years, both from a propulsion perspective as well as from a design engineering perspective. So we've looked at places like London and Brisbane, where they have the need for a very low clearance. They've got a fairly narrow waterway with a current, and these designs are becoming a bit more prevalent. That is also to say, I don't believe we could go out tomorrow and find a vessel that would work well for us on the Willamette and that clearance of the steel bridge. This capacity is 149 passengers, so there's a top deck in the summer months only during good weather, where the rails and the seats pop up for people to sit outdoors, so particularly for the visitor market. We would be looking at probably 5 days a year that we'd be requesting to raise the rail bridge, the lower bridge on the steel bridge, for when we have water levels that are really high. This particular vessel is a full diesel vessel, and it's running with propellers. We are looking at jet propulsion because of the river debris issue, and John Lake, who's the CEO of this company, and we've had conversations, and he's like, if I were to do it all over again, I would not have propellers because they've had issues with water debris there. And so we're looking at a hybrid propulsion system, which would be electrified, particularly in the city center, and then further out, like the Vancouver, rounding the corner of the confluence, running on R99, which is renewable diesel. So it's 80% cleaner than traditional diesel. So that actually is a fairly traditional propulsion system. And then as the technology advances, we could go ahead and pull out that propulsion system and put a full electrified system. I have people that often kind of challenge me and say, oh, I know there are full electrified ferries out there already, and I'd like to use the example of Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls, you're going very slowly, and you're going about 4 miles. You're not going very far. For us, we'd be moving at 24 knots, and we'd be moving against the current for 15.5 nautical miles. So the technology does not exist today with this size of vessel with full electrified. I mean, the battery size would just supplant the number of passenger seats we could have. So we do have a team of engineers that we work with, and we've looked at hydrogen fuel cell and a lot of different means, but we believe this is the best for us. And our proposal would be ordering 5 vessels, operating 4 at a time, so you constantly have one circulated out for maintenance, operating 6 days a week, 14 hours a day, and as I mentioned, having that one on a rotation. I'm going to do a quick time check here. Target audiences, number one, really our bread and butter would be commuters. That is really what we're focused from a financial model on this. And then locals crisscrossing the river during the day, the visitor market, and then in the event of an emergency, for emergency planning. In terms of the number of passengers per day, this is based on an 80% capacity model that we'd be moving over 2 million people a year. So for fares and services, so currently for TriMet, a ticket costs $2.50. The true cost of that ticket is about $20. So that subsidy is about $17.50. And the average transit subsidy, you can see there, and again, this is pre-COVID, is 84%. So Portland streetcars a little bit higher than that, but for TriMet, that's a good number, and that's what's in their budget. For us, we are looking at the true cost for the ferry of being about $10.50, and we would have a 50% subsidy. So we're looking at an average ticket cost of $5.50 with the subsidy being $5. So $5 subsidy versus $17.50. The fare box gold standard, so that means what ferry services nationally really try to achieve is a 30% ticket income with a 70% subsidy. We believe we can be at a 50% because Boston's currently operating at a 55%. They're operated by a nonprofit, much like our governance is set up. And Kitsap County, which is the bigger ferry service out of Seattle, is operating at 45%. They could be higher than that for collections, but they have chosen to keep their prices low. So they have chosen a 45%. And the most asked questions I get are, will you have coffee and microbrews? Will you be ADA compliant? And will you have Wi-Fi? And of course we will. So just in big buckets of time frame on this, 2017 really through this year is a lot of research, a lot of outreach, a lot of coalition building, and we need to secure that public agency sponsor. And to date for pro bono, that was the first week in March, we were at about 4.1 million that we had delivered. And I think to date, we have, I think we've been collected a total of $50,000 in public funding, and that's from the city of Portland. And then for 2021 through 2023 is building out the pilot project, proof of concept. And that probably just won't be open to the public. We will probably have that be a closed loop. We're currently looking at Cathedral Park and St. John's neighborhood to OHSU. And then we could see like on Saturdays or midday that the public could come out and ride. But that's coming together, soliciting federal funding, putting vessels on order, building out docks, and largely there are dock facilities or there's already infrastructure in the water. OHSU is one where it's missing and we need to bring in a floating dock under a temporary permit to get that there. But the Cathedral Park has actually 2 docks there. They don't have railings. We would need to reinforce them. And all of that will be included in that operational feasibility study that will be coming out the first week in October. And then launching a public ferry service in 2024. Lots and lots and lots of outreach to supporters and stakeholders. And I'm not going to take you through all of these, but we're just right at 1,500 stakeholders and supporters. Every single one we have earned one by one through just contact, and it might be even people like you that email me and say, I'd like to be on your newsletter, or I'd like to see if I can help out in some way. That's really how we have grown this grassroots effort. We have created 8 different teams behind Frog Ferry. So in addition to our 6-person board that we're planning on building out a little bit, let's see, we're coming up on our 2-year mark. So for our governance, that'll be in November. And it's looking like all of our board members do want to continue serving, but we're looking to recruit more people. And I have talked with Todd about a new committee we're probably going to be starting up about the passenger experience that I would love to have him participate on. I'm not going to go through all these names, but just I think it's really important for people to understand the depth of the bench behind us. And I'm not being glib when I say I am never the smartest person in the room. And I think we all have superpowers, and I like to think my superpower is gathering really good people, not necessarily for mind share, but all of us are truly smarter than one of us. And it gives me great confidence to know I don't have to be an expert in the propulsion systems and supply chain and all. We've got a really good team to help us with this. So these aren't all the names, but it's a good representation. We have the Maritime Operations team. We have a strategy and public affairs team, the engineering team, the public agency, the transit agency liaison team, our finance team. You'll see the names in green are also our board members. So Scott South, who is a business leader out of Vancouver, and then Dan Bauer is the executive director of Portland Streetcar. So he really understands the city of Portland and as an operator, and we're loosely using their governance. They were founded in 1994, public-private partnership. They have a nonprofit board today that continues to govern, and then they contract out the operations to TriMet, and they were able to get the federal funding because the city of Portland was their sponsor. So the city of Portland officially owns the streetcars and the rail lines, and the nonprofit runs it. The service providers, it's a lengthy list of people that contribute pro bono to helping this. Our community outreach is super important to us. We have 28 neighborhood associations on that, and we have a pretty good community benefit plan that's about 30% baked. We are just setting up a meeting. We actually haven't met since COVID hit, but we'd met 6 times prior to that at different locations up and down the route. And then the marketing and communications team, which is very well led by 2 of our board members. They're both marketing experts. We had a second press conference on March 5th, right before Oregon shut down, the world shut down, and had 53 stories that came out of it. And candidly, even back then, before we really knew what was going on with COVID, the media were saying, oh my gosh, we're just looking for good news, something that's hopeful and will improve our community and help with air quality. And this is just such an inspirational effort here. So that's really the presentation. It has just been a remarkable experience. I've learned a lot. There are a few things I do differently were I to do it all over again. However, I have to admit that taking the perspective of really reaching out and just being curious and not just having an agenda of we're going to do it and we're going to do it this way, but just iteratively learning from this, not driving it in a particular direction, but simply gathering and kind of processing and assessing and having a lot of good people be part of this is really what's helped us get to where we are today. And that's what I have. So I will end the slideshow.
Thank you so much, Susan, for a very informative presentation. Really enjoyed it. We've got a couple of questions in chat. They're short, so I'll go ahead and read them. Bernard asks, will there be an integration with TriMet and TriMet's modes of transportation for ease of ticketing, and will you partner with them for some sort of all-inclusive fare?
Super good question, and that is certainly our intention. We would love to be part of the HOP project. We really want this to be seamless, so people can pull up an app and say, here I am at my home and I need to get there. Maybe it's to that doctor's appointment. And what is the best way for me to do that? And it could be taking a bus down to the waterfront and jumping on board a ferry. For most modes of transit, people are only willing to take one mode, but except for when it comes to ferries, and people are willing to take 2. So, the ferry isn't going to work for everybody based on, where they're located, but we think just given the proximity of the river to so many touch points and downtown, and also to your question, those potential stops that I outlined for you, we didn't make those up. It's not like Susan or the Board of Frog Ferry said, oh, these are my favorite places and we think we should have docks there. It was the public transit agencies saying, Milwaukee, that's within 2 blocks of light rail, and the OMSI stop, that's right there by Tillicum Crossing and where the Portland streetcar is. So that overall connectivity to the rest of the transit grid is an integral part of this strategy. So great question. you know, just having a once in a blue moon is not really a good way to run a sustainable ferry system. And some of that, Gail, is because the infrastructure that you need to have there at the dock, I mean, you really need to be servicing it. We are working with the Willamette Falls Trust. I've met with the Clackamas County Transportation team. The tribes obviously have a part in this, and you know, as we're trying to figure out exactly what our relationship is with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and their interest there in the mill site, and so I don't think we'll be part of when we first launch it. I don't think it'll be Oregon City because of the work that needs to be done there along the waterfront. But I would see it as absolutely being a means for commuters, and also as they're building out that waterfront site there, the incredibly, incredibly beautiful Willamette Falls. And I'm embarrassed to say, but it's an honest thing. I've lived here my whole life. I had never really been out to Willamette Falls until this last year. And it's just so underserved. I'm like, there's Multnomah Falls, and it's our top visitor destination, and here's Willamette Falls, and people don't know about it. So I know there's a lot of interest for people to be able to access Oregon City. So, so yes, my intention is, if we're going to serve it, we're going to serve it regularly and multiple times a day, not just once in a blue moon. Because if you put in the dock and the waterway, it doesn't pencil out to only be once in a blue moon.
Okay, Al has the next question. He asks, how many passengers will the ferry carry in bad weather, and will it fit under the Hawthorne Bridge?
Great question. I don't know where your picture is there. I'm trying to figure out if you're an engineer or not. So it's going to, first of all, for the vessel, it will depend on what our vessel actually is. You know, we're very aware of the inclement weather. I would say that for the pilot project, we might start with a little bit smaller vessel for the proof of concept. So that might be closer to 70 to 80 seats, and that would be enclosed and covered. And the recent conversations are, we may have so basically the same model, same platform, same propulsion system, which is super important because you don't want to have different parts and basically a different maintenance schedule if you've got two sizes of vessels. So I think we will have probably a smaller vessel and maybe 2 or 3 of those. And then we'll have larger ones that would be for the 149 capacity for commuters. So that's something these boat builders, we issued an RFI, or request for information, about a year ago. We had 7 proposals that came in from boat builders, 4 different designs, and the range of the seats on that were, I would say, 60 to 149. It's a classification in the regulatory environment of 150 on up. You're just a different level of protocol. So we really want to stay under the 149. For the Hawthorne Bridge, yes. So for clearance under the Hawthorne, yeah. The steel bridge is really the one that's the trickiest.
Okay, Willie has a question similar to something I was going to ask you. Talk about the need for a public agency sponsor and just the scope of who that could be.
Okay, so who that could be is really the federal government outlines it. And so for Oregon, it could be Oregon Department of Transportation, so state agency, or I suppose it could be the Oregon Marine Board, although they're more the regulatory. So really ODOT, PBOT/City of Portland, TriMet, CTRAN. Even though they're over in Vancouver, they do serve Portland, but it's highly unlikely. Metro, our Regional Council of Governments, and even though they're not an operator, they are a planning agency and they do get a lot of federal funds. And the tribes, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So I am presenting to the Oregon Department of Transportation Commission in October, and I have presented to them before. City of Portland, I'm waiting on for the election. So they all know about this, they're all aware of it, but I think we might as well wait until the new year when we have a new commission in office, rather than trying to get anyone's attention during the election. TriMet has already given us a hard no and said, we're just not in the position to lead this. We don't know ferries. Metro's considering it. I'm presenting to, I think, all but one right now, Metro Commissioner in the middle of September. And then the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, I presented to the Tribal Council 2 weeks ago. And we're planning on convening to kind of take it the next step. So we're all sort of dating one another. And we're basically trying to show, hey, we will do 99.9% of the work, but as a nonprofit agency, we do not qualify.
Okay.
So did you, has anybody come to you and said, we want to do this?
Well, I mean, really the genesis of this project was them saying, you take it on, you know, we don't have the expertise and we don't have the capacity. All of these agencies, even pre-COVID, have said, gosh, you know, we don't have the time and we don't have the expertise or funding. And the other thing, Willie, is, you know, they've been kind of waiting to see, you know, if we were going to keep moving things forward. You know, I think it was a little bit of, okay, you know, is this just an idea? But the fact that we have delivered 2 of the feasibility studies, we got funding for the 3rd, we are on time. And I almost hate to say it out loud, but I have to say I'm also proud of it. 3 years ago, I mapped out the time frame on this. We are within 3 months of that time frame from 3 years ago. So, you know, that's not just me, but everybody was saying, this is going to take a long time. I spent 20 years with public transit agencies. And so I built in a lot of time for it, but the fact we're gaining so much traction and so much support, and even for the city of Portland and their funding match, that was 3 weeks ago, we had a 4-0 vote with everyone behind us in the COVID era. And people are like, how did you do that? You know? And it's because we had stakeholders and supporters behind this, that we're going to our council members and saying, we believe in this. And candidly, people have just so many false assumptions about this that we have to go clarify. Oh, you're a for-profit, you're going to make a bunch of money. No, that's not true. You know, we're just not. There's really no money to be made in this. We know that. So, Willie, it's a good question, but
are you dependent on
are
you dependent on the federal government's money?
Well, for us to have a public ferry service, yes, all of them have really, that's where the vast majority of the money is. There's a lot of money there for it. If the local, if none of these local agencies step up, what we'll probably have to do, and I don't want to do, is say, do we do this privately? And that's when then ticket prices go up. You know, public transit is heavily subsidized. It's expensive. And I think it's really important, but I think it's also important for all of us as taxpayers to know, when you buy that $2.50 ticket, that is not the true cost of your ride, you know? And so just from a fiscal perspective, are there other opportunities? Yeah, and I just don't really want to have a private investor come in and charge really expensive ticket prices for those that can afford it. Now, I will say, Willie, we may, for the pilot project, we may do that privately, just to prove it and allow enough time for the public agencies to get behind us. So that could be OHSU saying, we're going to give some money to move our employees. It could be a sponsor. You know, I'm Tillamook Cheese, you know, coming in and sponsoring it. It could be private investors to move it forward, because right now all the public budgets are so tight here locally. So we're trying to be open and just see what's going to be in the best interest of our community.
Okay, Lori has a quick question for us. Have you had any input from the Willamette or the Columbia River Keepers?
I have not been in touch with them for probably a year. I I think the Willamette River Keepers are staying apprised, and they are on our mailing list. It's been more the harbor keepers and oh gosh, there are a few different nonprofits that we've worked with. The Trust, Freshwater Trust. So I probably should be reaching out to them again, but nothing directly recently.
Okay. And Joyce had a question.
Why run the service only 6 days a week if you want tourist participation? Wouldn't the bulk of tourism come on Saturday and Sunday?
Oh, okay. Really, you guys are really a good group. These are great questions. Joyce, I would love to run this 7 days a week, but I want to under promise and over deliver. And so right now I want to build in a day for a thorough cleaning of all the vessels, just looking at the cruise schedule, and for maintenance, because going back to what's the number one determinant of success is reliability. We absolutely have to keep running. And that's why I really want to have the spare vessel as well. And so if we get clicking on all cylinders, and so we're rotating through on the maintenance and from a staffing perspective, because the bigger lift here is not just like building a new ferry service. If you think about like Tacoma, Washington is looking to start a new ferry service from Tacoma to Seattle. Well, they've got ferry services all over the place. For us here, we're building a culture and a new infrastructure around it. And I don't think our public here is going to be very understanding if just because we're new that we hit a big log and have to pull a boat out and we don't have a vessel to get right there in the water. So that's why I just think saying 6 days a week, and then let's prove it and show that we have a really high operational reliability rate. It's called ORR. That operational readiness rate last year in King County was at 99% on-time reliability. The year before that at 98%. In the helicopter business I've been in, we were over 97%. So if we have really high on-time reliability, and we think we can go ahead and operate 7 days a week, we will. But that's the thinking.
Okay, and right next to Joyce, we have a question from John there.
Okay, this is really going to be a commuter line, and if it's going to be just like the commuter trains in the Bay Area, in LA, and San Diego, they only run during the commuter hours, during the rush hours. Isn't that true, what it's going to be?
Actually, how am I going to answer this? I'll answer it this way. We're not saying commuter hours only. These vessels need to be run. So running them and stopping is not great. There is for Kitsap County out of Seattle, oh gosh, what's the name of the town? They do have like a 3-hour break midday. So it's totally just, it's one of their main services that just totally it came out of my brain. So if you go over there, you basically have 3 hours we're committed to. The rotation and the schedule for people to know and be able to plan their day is super important. So really, to address your question, it's based on what the demand and the need is. So we want to have the commuters, but then midday for doctor's appointments and lunches and things like that during the day. And then there's a Blazer game. So we've presented to the Blazers and said that would be an on-demand service as needed. It wouldn't be all the time. So it's going to be based on demand. This isn't just going to be based on what we think it should be. But no, it's beyond commuters. We want to keep these vessels running for 14 hours a day.
Okay, we have a question from Mike Bruchet, who does such a great job on our technical team here at the Humanists. He asks, what is the security going to be like on the ferry with some recent things happening on Max? Security is obviously a key concern.
Yeah, another really great question. And it's interesting to know this is a question that only really comes up in Portland. As I've talked with other ferry markets, unfortunately, security has not been an issue for them. And the maritime consultant I work with out of Seattle, and he works on different services around the world. And he's like, Susan, this just doesn't come up. And I'm like, well, it's a big issue here for Portland. And the number 2 reason for why people don't ride TriMet, this was the DHM research that came out about a year ago, was because of safety concerns. Mark Crosby is a brigadier general. He handled security with the Port of Portland. He and I have been talking about this issue for a couple years now. And so we will have that safety and security plan for this. And you know, there are just some basics, requirements for vessels and the number of staff crew members you have. You have to have 1 per deck in addition to the captain. Will we have them carrying? I don't know, maybe, you know, but if the research is showing that our traveling passengers are feeling more comfortable that way, could be, you know, I hate to even have a world where this is a consideration, but we do want to make sure that people are feeling confident when they board that ferry. Even from a pandemic perspective, you know, we were talking about having an archway. I mean, honestly, this is 2 years ago, saying, because I said, it seems like every time I board a plane, a commercial plane, I'm sitting next to someone that's sick, you know, for a cross-country trip, and someone is, you know, just sneezing or coughing the whole way, and I get sick. And Mark, is there a way that we could have an archway or something where people walk through to make sure people don't have fevers, or, you know, something to help us be sure that we're doing our due diligence. And the other aspect, Michael, and I don't know if this was part of your question or not, but looking at just from a health perspective at ventilation. So I was just talking with the CEO and the vice president of a boat builder last week and saying, are you looking at the aviation model for kind of air conditioning units and for air quality? So knowing that vessels already get really good airflow through there, but understanding a lot of AC units, like in restaurants, push air down and out. For most airliners, they're pulling the air up in a way, you know, so basically the germs that recirculate, or excuse me, are filtered, they don't recirculate. So can we do that here for the vessels? And they're like, you know what, Susan, you're the first person that's brought that up, but we will absolutely be looking at it. That's something that would be helpful for us to have and a competitive advantage for some of our other builds. So we'll have a holistic safety and security plan behind this.
I'm sorry.
So first of all, I wanted to say, my sister lived in San Francisco for quite a while, and she's employed there. And then she moved to Vallejo, and there's a ferry that runs from Vallejo to San Francisco, and she has just found that wonderful. I mean, she has just loved the whole experience of taking the ferry to and from work, and it's added a lot to her life and given her time to do things during the commute. But you got into some of the COVID thing there at the end, and I was wondering, so I just heard that REI had to reverse the whole idea of moving their corporate headquarters because you know, and maybe companies are having to rethink this whole idea of even having company headquarters, and there will be lots more telecommuting in the future, et cetera. Have you had to factor some of that that change in work patterns into some of your predictions for how the traffic is going to be?
Well, absolutely. And it's hard to know in 2022 where we'll be for traffic. So, you know, I don't have, my crystal ball is not any better than yours. Kittleston just came out with a new report. I think it's on our website. And if not, if anyone wants to see it, I can send it through to you, or you can just Google Kittleston. They do a lot of the transportation research. And this is probably from 10 days ago. And it shows that 20% of all traffic is for commuters. So we still have the 80% that are out there. And I've been following the REI story as well. You know, then there was just a story that came out this last week from our own Wyden and Kennedy saying, we are really missing being together, and creatively we don't feel like we're producing as well. So I think it will depend on the company and the culture and the nature of the work. But fundamentally, what we're hearing, particularly out of Metro, is congestion remains an issue. Looking at the recession in 2008 and all of the ebb and flow, we've seen a continued issue with traffic congestion here. And we're just hamstrung. We've been continuing to plan based on road and rail. And so we still believe there's a play here. And we're not talking about moving tens of millions of people. We're looking at starting with this at 2 million. But if that is, based on Columbia River crossing data, 67% of people in single occupancy vehicles. So, we're moving 1.75 million cars off the roadway. You know what? I'll take it for a start. That's got to be a good thing for our community.
Thank you.
Okay, we have potentially 2 other questions if we have time. Dorman asks, talk about the navigation of the ferry and what is used to prevent accidents.
Well, this gets a little bit beyond my pay grade. I'm not an expert in this, but there are pretty amazing technologies out there, and there are protocols as well. So in terms of accidents, really our greatest potential issue with accidents are running into logs out there. We have a lot of river debris. So we've been talking with the design engineers about reinforced hulls, and particularly the bow of the boat. The bow may be more narrow to allow for deflection. And even I kind of teased out those animal images from canoes, because we kind of like to take the designs and decoration from the canoes to put on our vessels. And we could reinforce then with like a carbon fiber, the animal imagery on the bow to help reinforce those. So when you look at Garmin technology, there's a lot of just really good advances that are out there. But I think bottom line, it's going to be the design engineering of this. And it's going to be that propulsion system and looking at jets for maneuverability. It's amazing what I've been on a couple of the vessels and what they can do, and spinning around and moving the vessel sideways. But in terms of accidents with other vessels, it's like flying, it's like driving. There are rules of the road. There is a hierarchy for the vessel and who goes where. So if you talk with experienced navigators on our river and ask this question, which I was doing 2 years, 3 years ago, and they're like, these rivers are so underutilized and there are protocols, that's the last of your worries. So it's a good education for all of us. But it also means suddenly having a regular operator on the river, which is new, means, okay, for folks that are accustomed to fishing and anchoring out in the middle of the navigation channel, that's probably not going to happen anymore. And so we're going to need to do a lot of outreach that way, because right now it's kind of the Wild West.
That sounds good. And last question, I'll give you a chance to clarify some of the numbers. Helen was processing the daily traffic in the chat there. Tell us again what the desired daily traffic on the ferry is, what your target passenger load is.
Well, the numbers we have for passengers there were based on the 149 passenger, the full one for the public ferries. For the pilot project, I think we're going to have a smaller vessel. And so is it Helen that's asking the question? What I'd love to do is I have kind of a simple math worksheet. So Helen, if you want to email me, I can send it to you so you can take a look at it. So it's really based on 2 vessels out of Vancouver and doing round trips. Okay, so if we're doing a round trip every hour and 10 minutes, back and forth, and I think we've got it based on 4 round trips and doing that math, and I don't know I'm going to be able to do it right off the top of my head, but the simple math in this document will take you through it pretty quickly, and then you'll see it operating at 80% capacity, how we get to those numbers. Sorry, not Helen, Al. Okay, sorry.
That seemed like more of an Al question in the Christian Zoom account there. Al is the
my
math
email
guy,
address is just, I'm Susan at frogferry.com. So just email me and then I'll email that back to you. But, and I would love to have you play around with these numbers a little bit.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for your work and for an outstanding presentation. We've got.
Oh, thank you so much. I will use
You're
that
welcome.
with pride. I thank you. I will
Thanks for
use
being
that
here.
with a lot of love.